Story 1. It was our fourth date. She brought up the ex's conversation. How many relationships have you been in? Why didn't they work out? And so on. Without skipping a beat, she told me she'd probably still be with her last partner. But he left because she lied about taking birth control. Story 2. He said he was a bartender. We went to his apartment, and he said he would make me a drink. Then he put my drink in a different style glass than his. I asked to add something to it. I took a single sip and noticed he was watching me very intensely. I told him, "Try this, it's so good." He didn't swallow. I left. Story 3. Attempted to rekindle a relationship because we bumped into each other at a happy hour and had a fun conversation, and thought perhaps things ended prematurely. She was game for grabbing dinner and even suggested a good Italian place that she had been wanting to try. Done. Reservation booked. Time set. The day of our date arrived. We were supposed to meet there separately, but mid-morning she texted asking if she could get picked up. Sure, no problem. She texted again, this time asking if we could change the reservation time to an hour later in the evening. Okay, I'll see what I can do. Done. Another text, this time asking about possibly going to a different restaurant because one of her girlfriends suggested a better spot. I actually reserved a table at said better spot at the later time and everything. Oh, but then I found out that she didn't want the later time at the better spot. She wanted to go back to the original time. I forget exactly what my text message said at this point, but it was something along the lines of, "I'm sorry to do this, but I'm just not hungry anymore." Story 4. When he asked me if I thought he smelled nice, I politely said yes, and he reached into his leather jacket and brought out a little sample atomizer of Ferrari cologne. He proudly presented it to me, saying I could keep it as a memento of our date and him. In the right way, it could be rather kitschy and cute, but this guy was fully into himself all night, and this was the cherry on top. He was shocked when I didn't want to go home with him that night. Story 5. We went to a movie, and as we got up, she threw the popcorn on the floor, flipped the bag, and gave it a good shake. I said that wasn't nice, and she said they have people to clean up. I wish I had said something else, but I sort of just went on autopilot until I dropped her off. Story 6. He asked me how much the bill was for his portion on our first date. I scanned the bill and said, "Just put in $15 and it's fine. I'll get the rest." He grabbed the bill out of my hand and proceeded to explain to me the exact amount he owed for about 5 minutes, as if I didn't understand basic math. Oh, and I'll throw in a bonus here. Another guy, first date. We met online, so it was our very first time meeting. We met at the restaurant and parked close, so our initial meeting was in the parking lot. He said hi, asked how the drive was, and then told me that if I didn't agree to sleep with him after dinner, he wasn't going to bother with the meal. I got right back in my car and left. Story 7. He asked me how many other guys I was talking to, and when I said no one else, he said, "Fine, lie to me if you want. I'm talking to 7 other girls." It's kind of a slow week for me because it's usually like 15 to 20. I laughed because I thought he was joking, and that upset him even more. He told me he could have anyone he wanted, and he left. Story 8. I have 2 nightmare dating stories, but this one takes the cake. About 17 years ago, I dated a guy that I met off of Match. We had a good connection via messaging, phone calls, and we went on 4 dates. After the 4th date, there was a sudden change. He would take days to answer back, so I figured he was just busy and I just left him alone. After a while, he finally contacted me to go out on a 5th date and said let's go to Venice Beach, as I have never been there before. When I was in the car with him, he never said a single word. He drove us out to Venice Beach, never made eye contact with me, and we were just in this weird, awkward silence the whole time. I would ask him what is wrong, what is on his mind, and if he needs me to call for help. No answer. I knew something was bad. Of course, in my mind, I was running various scenarios in my head about what my next move was. We went back to his car, and he was taking me back home. Before we got close to my place, he let out a deep sigh and said, "I have something to tell you." Of course, my insides were screaming at this point. He said, I don't deserve you. You have a lot to offer someone to make them happy, and I am not that person." He paused, sighed again, and then said, "You know why I was not responding early on? because I was in mandatory anger management counseling and was having trouble coping with life. My eyes grew wide, and I asked what happened. He said his last girlfriend got on his nerves over something they argued about, and in turn, it frustrated him so much that he nearly choked her to death. Because of what occurred, he was in court-ordered counseling for the next few years and had to check in with someone 3 times a week. He felt he was ready to date again because he felt he mentally moved on to becoming a better person. By the time he pulled up to my house, he finished everything he was saying. He asked, "What do you think I should do? What advice do you have for me?" I told him calmly, "I admire your courage to tell me the truth. I think the best move from this point is to remove your dating profile, finish your healing, rebuild yourself, and maybe try again when you feel ready." I said bye to him, went back in the house, and I literally just sat in my bed in a weird stupor because I could not believe what happened and thanked my stars that nothing happened to me. Strange but true, he actually did write me a final email thanking me for everything, and he did take down his profile a day later. Story 9. Prior to the date, he told me he had a son. During the date, he casually mentioned he actually has 3 children, but 2 don't count because their mom is a bitch. Edited to add, some of you all are doing some mental gymnastics to excuse this man. He meant what he said. I asked him to elaborate and he doubled down. Story 10. I was on a first date with a young Mormon lady. We were in our mid-20s. She was telling me a little bit about her beliefs about the 7 stages of heaven and how most people can get to at least the first level of heaven. Then she started talking about sin and how you can see deeper sins in the color of people's skin. That darker skinned people have more inherent sin, so cannot go to heaven. But if they repent their sins, their skin will become pure and white, and then they can at least enter. As she was explaining this to me, her speech got slower and slower. You see, I'm Latino. Needless to say, we didn't make it to the first base of heaven. Story 11. He was a widowed high school principal who had recently quit his job. When I asked why he quit, he said he was actually asked to resign because he had punched a student who had talked back to him. Another guy I went on one blind date with told me he was recently divorced because his wife left him after he was arrested for solicitation of prostitution. Story 12. Online dating will change you. I have stories where I declined in person, but the wildest by far was when I figured out the full name of the person I was chatting with and did a Google search. The top result was a news story about how she cheated on her boyfriend while he was in their house. A confrontation ensued, and the boyfriend was killed by her new lover, who was their friend. The funniest part, we matched online only 7 months after the article was published. Story 13. He kept telling me how much I reminded him of his daughter, while he kept trying to grab my face to go for a kiss. When he went to the bathroom, I ran out. Story 14. He asked me to go to a movie, then pulled up in Crocs and pajamas. He said we were going to go to his house instead of the movie theater. Then he proceeded to tell me he doesn't actually have his driver's license. Story 15. It was a blind date. Surprise. 2 of her friends just happened to show up. She invited them to join us without even asking me. They pretty much ignored me and ordered the most expensive items on the menu, including drinks. Every time I tried to join in the conversation, I was rudely dismissed. I realized pretty fast that I was being scammed. They barely paid attention when I finished my meal and excused myself to go to the restroom. I went to the bar and had the bartender call my server over. I was a regular there, so they knew me. I told her what was up, and I wanted to pay my share of the check. I tipped her generously since I knew my date was probably going to screw her over. I warned my server that they might try to run out on the bill when they figured out I wasn't a sucker. I left and met some friends at a bar I knew they would be at. We had a good laugh about it. A few days later, I stopped back in the restaurant for lunch. The bartender told me I was right. He said it took them a while to catch on that I'd left. They did try to dine and dash and got caught. The manager threatened to call the police. They ran up a huge tab because they had several drinks each as well. One of the girls had to have her dad come down and pay the bill. Story 16. A friend of mine wanted to get into the dating scene but is very frugal, so he was using plenty of fish, which was his first mistake. He connected with a woman who seemed interested in having fun, so he made his second mistake by inviting her to his house. She immediately became upset that he didn't have Tito's vodka, which is the only thing she drinks, and insisted they go to the liquor store to get some. My friend was 50-50 about whether he was going to get robbed, but the other 50% was a good chance of getting intimate. He compromised by telling her to drive and left his wallet behind. They got into her car, and there was no seat on the passenger side. She said she had a huge dog, so she took the seat out and told him to sit in the back. They headed off to the liquor store. During the drive, he realized that this woman was drunk. He was still holding out for the possibility of intimacy, but when they got to the liquor store, it was too late. It was closed. The woman said, "I know a store that's open late, but the liquor stores are all state stores with the same hours." She insisted she knew a place, and he was captive in the back seat. She got on the interstate, and a while went by in silence. He eventually asked, "Where are we going?" She screamed in terror, forgetting he was in the back seat. She told him they were going to a liquor store in a city 30 minutes away. Now he had almost given up hope of any connection and just wanted to survive. He asked if they could just go home, and she screamed again, forgetting he was in the car. He tried to maintain a full conversation to keep her awake and aware of him, and they eventually reached the alleged open liquor store. It was closed. She insisted it was open and pounded on the door. Then came the onlookers. Some Mexican guys were sitting in a truck drinking beer and yelled at her. "That's closed. You want a beer?" She started yelling racial slurs at them, and not even the correct ones for Mexicans. Now, 3 Mexicans and a drunk, possibly bipolar woman were trading profanities. My friend finally reached the conclusion that his chances for intimacy were 0 and just walked away. He turned the corner, sat down at a bus stop, and called me. It was around 1 a.m. on a work night. I saw the call and thought, this can't be good, so I drove to pick him up. He told me the entire long story, most of which I honestly can't remember because it was much worse. Then we drank at his place until dawn and called in sick to work. Story 17. We had a pleasant first date, so we arranged for a second. I was waiting for him in the pub, and he was running late, so I texted, "Where are you?" He sent me a voice note screaming, "Where am I? Where am I? I'm outside the pub waiting for you. How dare you speak to me like that? I'm leaving." I was like, fair enough, and proceeded to have drinks with other people. Then, a week later, he asked if we could go on another date. Story 18. Went on a dinner date at a guy's house. He surprised me and had invited his parents over, and that was awkward enough. Then, in the middle of dinner, he got down on one knee and proposed. It was our first date. I just got up and walked out. Thank God I had driven there. At that point, I would have walked home if I had to, though. Story 19. I'm a gay guy. I had a date with a guy that seemed okay until the end of the night when he told me he had just come out to his family during his sister's wedding, which caused a bunch of drama. No thanks. If you aren't mature enough to realize that this is your sister's special day and you made it all about you, then this isn't going to work. Story 20. When he wouldn't get out of my truck until I kissed him, I threatened to drive to the police station to get him out of my truck. Spoiler alert, there wasn't a second date. Story 21. We went for a walk and there was a crossing. She asked me which way we should take. I said I don't care. I am just enjoying our walk. Afterwards, she told me that was the moment she knew I am not the one because she needs a man who can make tough decisions. Story 22. Met online and had been chatting a bit. Texting as I'm headed to meet up for the first date. Him. Can you pick me up? I'm not mobile at the moment. Me, sure. What's the address? Him. Do you think you could loan me a little money until next week? Me, bye. Literal conversation, no response after that. I didn't even make it out the door. Story 23. He was half an hour late, clearly intoxicated or on some kind of drug. Tried kissing me multiple times even though I told him to stop, and then slapped my ass in front of all these people in a pub. I didn't go on dates for a while after that. Story 24. When he said he traveled to Africa often for work, I lived in Africa for a bit and initially loved this. It was something we had in common, until he said he doesn't think people in rural villages in Africa should have access to clean water or electricity because someone has to pay for it. After going back and forth for a bit, I got up and left. Story 25. So when I was 21 years old, we went to the movies for our first date. We were watching The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug. Everything was great until about an hour into the movie, he started rubbing my belly. I was plus-sized, so I had a little stomach, like I was a Buddha or a magic lamp, and he was hoping a genie would pop out to make 3 wishes for him. I asked him to stop and that it was weird. Then about 15 minutes later, he leaned over and said he couldn't wait to put a baby into my belly. I said, "Excuse me? We just met, and I don't know anything about you." I got up and left the theater without him. There were just too many red flags that were too creepy for my liking. A few years later, a new friend ended up going on a few dates with the same guy. He ended up putting a tracker on her car and stalking her. I'm glad I followed my instincts. I only met her a couple of weeks after her mechanic found the tracker.